Today is September 2020. Okay.
It's 108. 108 Sutta.
That's the Sutta, yeah. Okay, so you don't have the book? Maybe if each one sits next to a person who has the book and you can look on it together. Okay, so we're going to start first with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa, namo tassa. Excuse me, I forget the right word. Namo tassa. I keep on falling into the street-like way of doing it. Will somebody remind me how to recite? To arahato samma sambuddhassa. That's the Sri Lankan way. Arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. That's the typical Sri Lankan way, no? How have I been doing it for the last 10 years? Okay, so today we're taking Sutta number 108. In the middle-length Discourses. This is called the Gopaka Moggallana Sutta. And this sutta is somewhat interesting because it takes place very shortly after the passing away of the Buddha. And so the sutta shows us how I call it the newly orphaned Sangha, had to deal with problems that would have arisen without having the supreme authority of the Buddha to always turn to for advice and guidance. Okay, so the sutta begins with, it says, "Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the venerable Ananda was living at Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrel sanctuary, not long after the Blessed One had attained final Nibbana." Okay, so according to the commentary, this sutta actually opens at a time when the Sangha has been gathering at Rajagaha in order to hold what came to be called the first Buddhist council. That is the first attempt of the Sangha to collect into some kind of formal arrangement the teachings of the Buddha. And so this sutta will open at the time that Ananda has arrived at Rajagaha in order to participate in the council. But apparently the council had not yet started, because if it had started, then Ananda would have been not in the bamboo grove, but he would have been at the place where the council was being conducted. That's the Boar's Cave. Okay, then the sutta, the next paragraph, gives us another sort of spotlight on a historical development of the period. It says, now on that occasion, King Ajatasattu, a Dehiputa of Magadha, was suspicious of King Pajota, and therefore he was having Rajagaha fortified. Okay, so who was this King Ajatasattu? He was the son of King Bimbisara, and King Bimbisara was one of the first lay supporters of the Buddha. In fact, according to the sutta that occurs in the Sutta Nipata, even before the Buddha was enlightened, when he had left the Sakyan Republic and had come to the state of Magadha as a seeker of the truth, a seeker of enlightenment, he was walking on alms, going on alms round. He was living outside of Rajagaha, and he would go on alms round through the city of Rajagaha. And one day, as the Bodhisattva, that is the future Buddha, was walking on alms through Rajagaha, King Bimbisara was in his palace, and he spotted the Bodhisattva down below on his alms round, and he was immediately impressed by the very calm and majestic demeanor of this ascetic. And so he asked his men to follow, some of his servants, to follow the Bodhisattva and find out where he was going. And so they traced him back to the cave where he was living and meditating. And King Bimbisara came to visit him. And King Bimbisara asked him about his background, because he thought that this, from his appearance, from his demeanor, that he couldn't be just an ordinary run-of-the-mill ascetic, but he must come from a very high-bred family, high-class family. And so the Bodhisattva told him that he was from the Sakyan clan, which was a highly respected clan, that he was from the aristocracy of that clan, but that he had renounced the world in order to seek enlightenment. And I think King Bimbisara, if I remember, tried to prevail on him to give up this quest for truth and to to marry into his own family, offering him part of the kingdom to rule. But of course the Bodhisattva firmly rejected that and expressed his determination to continue on his quest for the truth. So then King Bimbisara made a request of the Buddha. He requested him that if you succeed and you achieve enlightenment, then please come to see me and accept me as your disciple and teach me the truth that you've realized. Teach me the Dhamma. And then he made an aspiration, may I partake of the truth that you realized. In other words, may I share in that realization. Okay, so perhaps years later, when the Buddha attained enlightenment, of course he would remember that promise that he made to King Bimbisara. And so he came to see King Bimbisara, and King Bimbisara became his disciple and offered him the bamboo grove. And so the bamboo grove in Rajagaha was originally a gift from King Bimbisara to the Buddha. And then when the Buddha, after he accepted the bamboo grove, then he gave a discourse to King Bimbisara, and King Bimbisara became a Sotapanna. That is, he became a stream enterer, so he realized the first stage of enlightenment under the Buddha. Okay, many years later, The Buddha had a pupil, a disciple who came from the Sakya clan. We usually take the musical interlude halfway through. Okay, so the Buddha had a disciple or a pupil who came from the Sakya clan named Devadatta. And Devadatta had succeeded, I think when his early days as a monk, he was very diligent, and so he must have attained the jhanas, the meditative absorptions. Then on the basis of the jhanas, he achieved psychic powers, supernormal powers. Now Devadatta became, even though he might have been quite diligent and sincere when in his early years as a monk, but he was what one would call a bad seed. That is, he had a very bad streak in his character. He was ambitious, jealous, competitive, and over time, his aim, sort of the aim that solidified in his mind, was to get control of the Buddhist order. He knew that the Buddha was getting old, and he thought that in time the Buddha is going to need somebody to take his place. And so first, he tried to ingratiate himself to the Buddha by doing little acts of kindness and little acts of service to the Buddha. And when he thought that he had won the Buddha's favor, then he said, "Bhante, you're getting old now. We have a nice kuti for you. You take it easy. We bring you your meals. You don't have to give discourses anymore. Don't have to give teachings to the Sangha anymore. I'll take over for you." But the Buddha knew Devadatta was being driven by greed and ambition and lust for power. So he said, "No, I'm not going to give the Sangha to you." Okay, so Devadatta had a scheme took shape in his mind that he was going to try to use royal influence to get rid of the Buddha. But how could he use royal influence when the king of Magadha was Bimbisara, his pupil, his devotee, one who had already reached the first stage of enlightenment? And so Devadatta thought the way to get royal support is to knock out Bimbisara and replace him with somebody else. And who was next in the line of succession? Bimbisara's son, Ajatasattu. And so Devadatta used his psychic powers to come into the living quarters of King Ajatasattu. He came in the shape of a young boy. Then he manifested himself in the form of a young boy with a kind of number of cobras sort of wrapped around his body, swirling around his body. And so Prince Ajatasattu was frightened. He was wondering, what is this? Who is this? This young boy who just out of nowhere slips into the palace with all of these cobras wound around his body. So then Devadatta, when he saw Prince Ajatasattu, was afraid. He manifested his actual form as Devadatta and said, Ajatasattu, don't be afraid, I am Devadatta. Okay, so in this way, in a number of ways, Devadatta won the favor, the respect, the admiration of Prince Ajatasattu. And then when he knew that Ajatasattu had now trust in him and had become devoted to him, then he made a suggestion to Ajatasattu. This is a case of, there's a saying, birds of a feather flock together. So Devadatta must have had a keen insight into the character of Ajatasattu. So he said to him, Ajatasattu, when are you going to become king? And Ajatasattu said, well, when my father passes away. Then Devadatta said, that could be years. You're going to wait years to become king? Ajatasattu said, well, that's the way it is. One has to wait till the king dies. And when the king dies, then I take over. But then Devadatta said, well, I have a better idea. Why don't you get rid of the king? Then, you get rid of him and you can become king right away. You don't have to take that chance, waiting 10 years, maybe. Okay, so then he planted this idea in Ajatasattu's mind, and so Ajatasattu took over the kingship. He imprisoned his father Bimbisara, and then he had Bimbisara tortured. He cut off the food supply to Bimbisara so that Bimbisara gradually was starving. And then to hasten the process, I think he had him roasted on hot coals. So Bimbisara died and Ajatasattu became king. Okay, after Ajatasattu became king, it said that at a certain point he felt remorse over killing his father, and then he went to the Buddha. He received a discourse from the Buddha, which is the second sutta in the Digha Nikāya, the discourse on the fruits of recluseship, the Samanyapala Sutta. At the end of the discourse, Ajatasattu confessed that he had killed his father, the virtuous king Bimbisara, and he declared himself a pupil of the Buddha. He went for refuge, and seemingly, he declared that he went for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. I was going to say he undertook the 5 precepts, but from aspects of his behavior afterwards, I'm a bit doubtful about that. Okay, now the text mentions King Ajatasattu, who was the king of the large and powerful state of Magadha, and it also mentions another king, Pajjhota, who was the king of a country to the southwest of Magadha, some distance away, called Avanti. And now King Pajjhota was, during the lifetime of Bimbisara, King Pajjhota had established a friendship with King Bimbisara. He established a friendship because King Pajjhota had been suffering from a terrible headache, and none of his own physicians was able to cure it. And so he sent a message. He had heard that King Bimbisara had an outstanding physician named Jivaka. And so he sent a message to King Bimbisara asking him if he would send Jivaka to Avanti in order to treat him. And so King Bimbisara granted this request. He sent Jivaka, the doctor Jivaka, to Avanti, and Jivaka cured King Pajjhota of this terrible headache. And so in this way, King Pajjhota felt a deep sense of gratitude to King Bimbisara, and the two established a friendship. And so when King Pajota heard that Ajatasattu had killed his good friend, King Bimbisara, his own father, then he started to make plans to attack the kingdom of Magadha in order to take revenge, either to capture Ajatasattu or to kill him. And so these reports had been spreading, and word about them had reached Ajatasattu. And so now Ajatasattu was having Rajagaha fortified. So this is sort of the historical background to the sutta. Okay, now continuing. Now we come back from the conflicts of states, the ambitions of kings, murder, war, and so on, back to the peaceful life of a monk like Venerable Ananda, who now gets dressed early in the morning and takes his bowl and goes towards Rajagaha for alms. But as he's approaching Rajagaha, he thinks it's too early to walk for alms in the city, and so he decides to go to see the Brahmin named Gopaka Moggallana at his workplace. And this strikes me a little bit strange, because we have a Brahmin at a workplace. I believe, according to the commentary, Gopaka Moggallana was like a master craftsman who was helping to build the fortifications at his workplace that would be used to fortify the city of Rajagaha. Okay, in any case, Ananda approaches the workplace of Gopaka Moggallana, and I'll just refer to him for simplicity's sake as Gopaka. And Gopaka welcomes him. Apparently they've met on previous occasions, since Gopaka says that it's been long since Master Ananda has found an opportunity to come here. Okay, then when Ananda is seated, then Gopaka, the Brahmin Gopaka, asks Ananda a question. He asks him, I'm in paragraph 5 now, is there any single bhikkhu who possesses in each and every way all those qualities that were possessed by Master Gautama, who is the accomplished one, it's the Arahat, the fully enlightened one, the Samma Sambuddha? And then Ananda replies that there is no single bhikkhu who possesses in each and every way all those qualities that were possessed by the Blessed One, the fully enlightened one. And then Ananda highlights the way in which the Buddha stood out from amongst the entire community of monks. He says, for the Blessed One was the arouser, the one who gave rise to the path that had not been arisen before. He was the one who produced or created the path that had not been created before. He was the one who declared the path that hadn't been declared the path. He was the knower of the path, the finder of the path, the one skilled in the path. But his disciples now dwell following that path and become possessed of it afterwards.
But there were other Buddhas previous to Gautama.
Yeah, there were other Buddhas previously.
So the path was realized. He just realized it in our...
We say in our historical period, yeah. Okay, so this passage, if we take a look at it, it seems to be saying that the way in which the Buddha sort of stood out from all of the other monks was simply in being the one who discovered and proclaimed the path on his own without receiving it, or without receiving instructions about it from any previous teacher. And there's another sutta in the Sangha Nikāya which also corresponds very closely to this passage. And that sutta is sutta number, it's in chapter 22, the chapter on the five aggregates. It's sutta number 58. And this sutta says, in brief, it says that the Tathagata, the Arahat, the fully enlightened one, is one who has become dispassionate towards form, feeling, towards the five aggregates, form, feeling, perception, volitional activities, and consciousness. One who's become dispassionate towards them, one who's become liberated from them, one who has become dispassionate towards them, and one who has become liberated from them by non-clinging. And then the Buddha says, a monk who is an arhat is one who has also become disenchanted with the five aggregates, dispassionate towards them, and liberated from them by non-clinging. And so, in the sutta, the Buddha says, what is the difference? What is the distinction? What is the disparity between a monk who's an arhat and the Tathagata, the fully enlightened one? And then the answer that is given in that sutta is exactly the same statement as we find here, that the Buddha is one who arouses the unarisen path and so on, who's the knower, the finder, the one skilled in the path, whereas the monk who's an arhat is one who follows the path and then has become possessed of it afterwards. And so if one just sticks to those suttas, it would seem that the difference between the Buddha and an enlightened disciple is simply priority of attainment. But in my view, like if we take a more panoramic look at the canon or at the suttas, we find that there are suttas which ascribe to the Buddha qualities which are not held in common with disciples. And so these would be what I would call the distinctive characteristics or the exclusive characteristics of the Buddha. And so amongst them we find in Sutta number 12 in the Majjhima Nikāya, we find one set of qualities is called the 10 Tathagata powers, the 10 powers of a fully enlightened one, by which the Buddha is able to set rolling the wheel of Dharma. So it's through these powers that the Buddha is able to set in motion the wheel of Dharma, that is, to originate the teaching in a historical period where it doesn't exist, in which he's able to teach people of many different inclinations, tendencies, dispositions, modes of understanding. And so these 10 powers, well, I don't want to really get into them now. Some of them are held in common by disciples, and maybe disciples will have some of the others to some extent, but it's only the Buddha who has these 10 powers in their fullness. And these include the powers to know, or the ability to know the different state of the faculties of other people, to know what are their spiritual strengths, what are their spiritual weaknesses. And so on that basis, the Buddha can direct his teaching to people in order to build upon their strengths and to help them overcome their weaknesses. And again, the Buddha has a power which is called the knowledge of the inclinations and underlying tendencies of people. So on this basis, the Buddha is able, just by looking at a person, to know what are the inclinations of their mind. And so based upon their inclinations, the Buddha will give a fitting discourse. So he's able to shape the teaching to fit the interests, inclinations, dispositions of the people. And so the Buddha often he uses different metaphors or similes in his discourses. So those metaphors and similes can be fashioned because of the way in which the disciple or the listener can understand. For example, when speaking to a farmer, he might use the simile of a field. When speaking to a goldsmith, he might use the simile about the process of refining gold. Okay, so the Buddha has these abilities to know, with depth, to know the inclinations, tendencies, faculties of others, and to direct, to fashion his teaching, to fit their modes of understanding, their inclinations, their weaknesses and potential strengths. The Buddha also has a comprehensive knowledge of the workings of karma. And he also knows all of the different realms of existence and which kinds of karmas, which kinds of willed actions lead to the different realms of existence. And so the Buddha has this extremely extensive knowledge, types of knowledge, which qualify him to undertake that role of being the founder of the teaching, the one who has complete mastery over all of the different avenues, the different routes of the teaching. Okay, in addition to the 10 powers of a Tathagata, the Buddha also has something called the 4 types of fearlessness, or the 4 kinds of self-confidence, which are also mentioned in the same sutta, the Lion's Roar Sutta. So that is, the Buddha has the confidence that nobody can say to him that there are certain dhammas, certain principles that he has not fully awakened to. Nobody can say to him that there are certain defilements that he has not fully eradicated. Okay, the third is that nobody can say to the Buddha that even though you say that certain things are obstacles on the path to enlightenment, that they aren't really obstacles for one who engages in them. And then the 4th ground of self-confidence is that nobody can say to the Buddha that this teaching of yours will not lead one who practices it to complete emancipation from suffering. Okay, so this is another set of distinctive qualities of the Buddha, the 4 types of fearlessness or self-confidence. Okay, but here Ananda is speaking to this Brahmin maybe in a way that he would be able to understand, also because the Brahmin has not yet or not become a disciple of the Buddha, so to speak, about the 10 grounds of self-confidence, the 10 powers, the 4 types of self-confidence, might be stretching his capacity for belief a little too far. So he mentions only the Buddha's role as being the founder, the discoverer of the path, and the finder and teacher of the path. Okay, now as the two are carrying on this conversation, somebody else arrives on the scene, This is a Brahmin named Vasikara, who is the chief minister of the state of Magadha, which means that he was in fact the chief minister under Ajatasattu. So we would say he's Ajatasattu's right-hand man. And it said that he was supervising the work at Rajagaha. Like he was the one who was overseeing this project of building new fortifications for Rajagaha. So maybe he had come to check up on the work of Gopaka to see that he's progressing in building the fortifications. Okay, so when Vasikara comes on the scene, after exchanging greetings with Ananda, then he asks, what was the discussion that was going on here? And so Ananda reports the subject of their discussion, and then he says that this was our discussion that was interrupted when you arrived. Okay, but now the Brahmin Vasikara has some questions of his own to ask. And we have to remember now, this is a time just perhaps a month or two after the Buddha has passed away. And what's said is that when the other teachers of the period passed away, then their communities of followers broke out into quarrels, disputes, and split up into a number of subsects with differing interpretations of their master's teaching. And now everybody was sort of conjecturing and speculating, okay, now that the recluse Gautama has passed away, odds are 10 to 1 that his following is also going to split up into a number of fighting and quarreling subsects. And so I think Vasikara must have heard these reports, and so he wants to know, how is the Sangha going to maintain itself without the powerful leadership of the fully enlightened one? And so he asks Ananda, he says, is there any single monk who was appointed by Master Gautama thus, he will be your refuge when I am gone? So is there any such monk that you now rely upon as your refuge? And if you're familiar with the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, this was the sutta which reports the events that took place up to and including the passing away of the Buddha, then you might remember a passage a few months before the Buddha passed away. He got very ill, he turned very ill, and then when Ananda had observed this, after the Buddha recovered, Ananda came to the Buddha and said, when you were sick, we were all so worried. You're now 80 years old, you get sick, you can pass away. What's going to happen to us? Why don't you appoint the successor to take care of, to lead the Sangha after you have expired? Then the Buddha became very stern and he said, don't expect that I'm going to appoint a successor. There's no need for you to look up to any single individual as your guide, as your refuge. For 45 years now, I've been teaching the Dhamma. You've been getting instructions for 45 years. I've really covered every aspect of the path. It's all right down there in black and white. Well, at that time they weren't printing books. Well, you've got it all down in the corridors of your memory, and there are many learned monks who also know the teaching, learned monks, learned nuns, learned lay followers as well. So take yourself as a refuge. Be an island unto yourself. Don't look to any other refuge. And then the Buddha says, take the Dhamma as your refuge. Take the Dhamma as your island. Don't look to any other refuge. Okay, so that was about 3 months before the Buddha passed away. Then, just when the Buddha was lying on his deathbed in Kusinara, between the two sal trees, then he told, as part of his last advice to the Sangha, he said, for 45 years I've been teaching the Dhamma, I've laid down the Vinaya, that is the rules, the training, the rules of discipline. So now when I pass away, don't think, earlier we had a teacher, now that he's passed away, we don't have a teacher. Even after I pass away, you still have a teacher. It is the Dhamma that has been taught by me. It is the Vinaya that has been prescribed by me. That will be your teacher after I have passed away. And so in this way, the Buddha set up, almost putting in the chair of the teacher, the doctrine and the discipline, the Dhamma and the Vinaya. And so the monks, after the Buddha passed away, they continued to follow that principle. So there was no, I know that in the Zen tradition, there's a kind of a record that when the Buddha passed away, he appointed Mahakāssyapa as his successor. And then there comes what's called the patriarchal succession, coming down to the time when Bodhidharma went from India to China and then started the Chan succession down to the sixth patriarch, Huineng. Huineng.
Bhante, is this the reason some people refuse to take refuge in the Buddha and the Sangha, and they just take refuge in the Dhamma? Because, like Buddha said, you should just take refuge.
That I've never heard of. Because even in the canonical text, we have people taking refuge. During the Buddha's lifetime, people are always taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And then that became like a well-established tradition.
That was even during the Buddha's time, you said?
Yeah. If you look at sutta after sutta, you see that at the end of when the Buddha finishes giving a discourse, people will say, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Of course, maybe that became codified after the Buddha passed away. This we don't know, but it's certainly part of the early teaching. Okay, so now this is the question that Vasakkara asked to Ananda. And Ananda says that there is no single monk that we take refuge in who's been appointed by the Buddha, that we take refuge in and we look to him as our recourse. So then Vasakkara, he's maybe perplexed by this. Okay, maybe the Buddha didn't take that precaution, so the Buddha passed away without appointing a successor. But maybe the Sangha got together and appointed a successor. And so he says, is there, Master Ananda, any single monk who has been chosen by the Sangha and appointed by a number of senior bhikkhus? Thus, he will be our refuge now that the Buddha has passed away. And then Ananda says, no, it's not even the case that the Sangha has gotten together and appointed one single monk to become the leader of the Sangha, and that we all take refuge in him and look to him as we take recourse in him. So then Vasakkara says, well, in that case, Master Ananda, you don't have any refuge So how are you able to live together harmoniously? So then Ananda says that even though there is no personal successor to the Buddha, still we are not without a refuge, Brahman. We have a refuge. Our refuge is the Dhamma. Maybe this is why some people follow that practice. Okay, then in a rather long and roundabout way, I think this was just added by the compilers of the text in order to include some repetition. So in a rather roundabout way, Vasakkara comes to the end of the first paragraph in section 10. He says, how should the meaning of these statements be understood? And then Ananda explains to him. He says, Brahman, the Blessed One who knows and sees, the Arahat, the Sammasambuddha, has prescribed the course of training for the monks. And the word or expression that's translated here as course of training actually has a somewhat narrower meaning. The word is Sikkhapada.
Sikkhapada is precept?
Patience. Yeah, the word Sikkhapada, as it's come to be understood, well, first, the way it's explained, or the way it's constructed, the word Sikha means training. And so in the broad sense, in early Buddhism, we have what's called the threefold training. So we have the training in virtue or moral conduct, ethical conduct. And then sometimes they speak about the monastic rules of discipline as adi, sila, sika, the training in the extensive conduct, extensive virtuous conduct, virtuous conduct, or the higher conduct. Then we have the adhicitta sika, the training in the developed mind, the higher mind, which is the training for the practice of samadhi, of deep concentration. And then we have the adhipanya sika, that is the training in the deeper or higher wisdom. That's the wisdom of insight, the wisdom of realization. But the word pada is a very general word. Could be almost translated as factor. So we have factor of training. And so the word Sikkhapada comes to be used as a designation for a precept. So, for example, in the lay precepts, we call them the Panchasila, but when you take them, you say, for example, Panati Pata Vairamani Sikkhapadam Samadhiyami. So each of the 5 precepts is called Sikkhapadam. That is a factor of training. So it's a factor of the moral training. And so the word Sikkhapada in relation to the monastic code of discipline is also used for each of the training factors that the monks undertake. So each of the rules of the Patimokkha is called a Sikkhapada, a factor of training. So loosely we call it a precept, but the technical term used is Sikkhapada.
That's not the same pada as like Dhammapada.
It's the same pada.
It's the same.
Yeah. So the word pada, as I said, has very broad meaning. So it could mean, one of the meanings is word. So Dhammapada could be words of Dhamma. And pada can also refer to a verse. So Dhammapada could be verses of Dhamma. But pada also means a step. So Dhammapada could be taken to mean steps of Dhamma.
Is it one of the interpretations, path, also P-A-T-H? No.
One of the words which is translated as path is actually constructed from pada, and that is the word patipada. And patipada, you see, pada originally, one of the senses is a step, and patipada would be a succession of steps, a repetition of steps. So the repetition of steps is a path. Okay, so Ananda says, to the Brahman, he says, the Blessed One has prescribed the course of training for bhikkhus. So I think the intent here is that he's laid down the rules of training. So this is going to be the basis for their concord, that they have that they have the same body of precepts to observe. And he has laid down the patimokkha. The patimokkha is simply the collection of these training rules. And then Ananda explains that on the Uposatha day, the Uposatha day occurs twice in the month, or twice in the month, on the full moon day and on the dark moon day. So on this day, this was an ancient tradition in India, to observe these days as kind of days of religious observance. And so the Buddha conformed to that practice. And so what became the standard Uposatha observance for the monastic community is for all the monks or nuns separately living in a particular location to gather and then to recite the code of discipline together. Okay, so Ananda says, on the Uposatha day, as many of us live in dependence upon a single village district, meet together in unison, and when we meet, we ask one of our group who knows the patimokkha to recite it. So you see, in this early period, it seems that the Sangha would be, or the monks in the order could be spread out in a rather wide area around a certain town or village, and yet they would determine a particular boundary for that village. They would determine a particular boundary as defining the extent in which they're all can be considered to be dwelling somewhat in the same region or same area. And so they would determine a fixed place where they should all meet. Maybe they would have like a hall in the town or village, or someplace which is in convenient location for everybody to come together. And so then on the full moon day and the dark moon day, all of the monks would come together and live in order to hold the ceremony. The practice nowadays is to have the boundary simply around the monastery itself, so that all of the monks can come together. And even in the larger monasteries, what's done in order to avoid, this is a rather technical point, to avoid the problem of having monks who are living in the monastery, but for somehow they're overlooked, and so they miss out on the observance. They'll formally define the area for the observance, just a small area, maybe the area of maybe about 30 square feet, around in this room. So then all of the monks who are going to perform the ceremony will come within that area. And so there's no possibility that somebody will be left out by mistake if there's some visitor comes to the monastery. Okay, so now, but this seems to have been the practice described here is the practice from the early period. So when we all come together, then one of the monks will recite the code of discipline, the Patimokkha. And then if a monk, while the Patimokkha is being recited, if a monk remembers any offense or transgression he's committed, then he will, well, what's said here is we make him act in accordance with the Dhamma, in accordance with the instructions. Actually, but what is the practice that's usually done is that when the monks come together, if a monk remembers any transgression that he's committed, he will make a confession of that transgression before the recitation takes place, just usually to one other monk. For most of the offenses, just to confess it to one other monk is enough to be cleared. In the case of the heavier transgressions, the procedure is different. In the case of the heaviest, then the monk has to leave the order. It's a violation of the fundamental rules, so he has to be expelled. If, when the Patimokkha is being recited, he remembers a transgression that he has not yet confessed, then after the transgression, he can take usually just one other monk aside and confess to him. But he won't interrupt the recitation in order to get up and make a public confession. Okay, so then Ananda says that it is not the worthy ones that make us act, it is the Dhamma that makes us act. This is a little obscure, but I think it might be better translated. It is not the worthy ones, that is, it is not the other monks that deal with us. In other words, that prescribe, you should do this, you should not do that. But rather, it is the Dhamma that deals with us. That is, it's from the Dhamma that we learn what we should avoid, what we should do. Okay, maybe at this point I'll ask whether there are any questions on any of the material covered so far. Maybe our procedure here is that when one has a question, one takes the microphone. This ensures that the question will be recorded and everybody can hear it.
I don't know if it's a normal occurrence for monks or even lay people to offer confessions.
Oh, this is the regular monastic practice. A procedure is not laid down for lay people, but what I suggest to lay people, if they transgress one of the precepts that they've undertaken, and it's something that makes them feel, strong remorse, they can confess it either to a senior friend or to a monk, and this way will help to alleviate, the feeling of remorse in the mind, that they know that they've opened up about it and are not concealing it. Okay, Richard in the back.
This, I know, is a kind of curious question.
Okay.
But I was very struck in this by one thing. That is, this refers both back to 22, which is the simile of the snake, right? And in the background story for this, you have Devadatta appearing wrapped in snakes, right?
Oh, no. 22, Sutta 22 is the discourse on the simile of the snake.
Yeah.
Devadatta doesn't appear in that at all.
Right. No, I'm saying in the background story that you told about this one,
Yeah.
Devadatta appears in order to persuade Ajatasattu,
Yeah.
right? But he appears in Ajatasattu's mansion or whatever,
Yeah.
this castle,
Yeah.
wrapped in snakes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The other thing is, this also refers back to the lion's roar.
Oh, yeah.
Now, a lot of material in this refers to the lion's roar.
In the back, the way I explain the background, yeah.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
what I'm trying to understand is, the figure of Ion? Ion was, under the Roman Empire, there was a god, Ion,
Yeah.
who is a person wrapped in a snake with a lion's head.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
the associations
Yeah.
are the same. And so what I was wondering,
Yeah.
apparently it was an Oriental god that made its way into the Roman Empire, probably via Syria,
Yeah.
right? And this is the figure that Jung takes to be the symbol of the self. And I was trying to figure, one, is there any connection to Buddhism? I mean, it was a 40-day trip from Kanyakumari to the Euphrates. And two, that is this there seems to be a polar reaction, like the snake and the lion's head. The lion's head becomes a Buddhist thing because of the lion's roar, I assume. But then the snake seems to be is associated with much more with Hinduism and with things rather hostile to Buddhism. And many non-Hindus in India complain about being in a country of snakes and living amongst people who believe in the Naga and the snake, right? And so I was wondering if that figure is a composite of two opposites. That is, if the lion was a Buddhist part, and if the snake is something that comes like through Devadatta that's hostile to Buddhism.
Yeah, this I don't know, but I don't think the snake has an entirely hostile, or that the snake is viewed as an entirely hostile being in Buddhism, because in the account of the events after the Buddha's enlightenment, one of these days, it said that there was a rain, it was drizzling, and then a particular snake came and spread its hood over the Buddha in order to keep him dry so that he wouldn't get, moistened by the rain. But anyway, I think we should try to keep questions more directly on the subject matter. Bringing together when I was referring to, the story of Devadatta, then I mentioned the snakes, and when I was speaking about the Buddha's distinctive qualities, I brought in the sutta on the lion's roar, but they're not brought, the lion and the snake are not brought together to my mind, to my recollection, in a single sutta. Yes. And it's an area that I don't know, Roman mythology and where it sources from. I don't know.
Just explain one more time. Pati Mokkha.
Yeah.
The word, it's.
The word is somewhat a matter of the origins are exactly not known. My supposition, you see, the word mokkha, there's a word mokkha which means freedom, and so sometimes pati mokkha is understood to be a code of discipline that leads to freedom or liberation. And then sometimes pati is taken to be individual. So I know the Tibetans take pati mokkha to be the path of individual liberation. And so since it comes from early Buddhism, they say that like the pati mokkha is distinctive of the Hinayana or Shravakayana, the path of individual liberation. How did the Chinese render? I think they just transliterate the sounds poti mo, something like that. Poti mocha. But I found that there's a verb that occurs in Pali, pati munchati, which means to bind down. And to me that makes better sense, that the pati mokkha is the code of rules that binds one down, in the sense of binds one's conduct to a certain pattern. That's my supposition. Any further questions? Because I want to finish the sutta today, so let us then continue. Okay, so now, number 11. Now, the Brahmin Vasikara says, "Is there, Master Ananda, any single monk whom you now honor, respect, revere, and venerate, and on whom you live in dependence, honoring and respecting him?" Now that is the case. And as we'll see, Ananda affirms that there are at least one, but in fact there are many, because there were supposed to be many elder monks who had been, practicing and training under the Buddha for, at least 40 years. And so Ananda answers positively. He says that, though the text says there is a single bhikkhu, but actually the implication of this is that there is at least one monk, but actually there are many more, that there are at least many more that they honor, respect, revere, and venerate. And so now Vasikara thinks that he's caught Ananda in a contradiction here, that Ananda said that there's nobody who's been appointed a refuge, but you say that still you have monks that you honor, respect, and venerate. So then he says, how should the meaning of these statements be regarded? How do we reconcile them? And so then Ananda says that there are these 10 qualities that inspire confidence. Here the Pali word is pasada. The word pasada has a range of meanings. It's closely connected with the word saddha, which is often translated as faith, but whereas saddha emphasizes, on the one hand, more the aspect of believing, pasada maybe has a more emotional ambience. It's the quality of, maybe, I would like to explain it by the word trust. It's the quality that makes the mind serene through trust. And so pasada is, for example, if one looks at an inspiring Buddha picture, image of the Buddha or statue of the Buddha, you might have saddha, that's faith, all along. But when you look at, say, a very beautiful, inspiring Buddha image, then your mind becomes sort of serene, a bit joyful, and a feeling of kind of trust or even self-dedication, dedicating oneself to the Buddha, sort of manifests in the mind. And that would be the quality of pasada, of this confidence or trust. And so Ananda says that there are these 10 qualities inspiring confidence that have been declared by the Buddha. And so when these qualities are found in anyone among us, then we honor, respect, revere, and venerate him, and live in dependence on him, honoring and respecting him. So what are the 10 qualities? And now they unfold in a kind of graded sequence. So we have the monk is virtuous in his behavior, that he lives observing the rules of the Patimokkha, and he undertakes the training precepts. Then he's learned, one who's learned much, and who's mastered the teachings, the teachings which have been transmitted through the scriptures. Then he's easily content with the simple material requisites of robes, alms food, a dwelling place, and medicinal supports. Then he is one, so these first three pertain to the aspect of sila, of morality. Then comes number 4, he obtains at will, without trouble or difficulty, the 4 jhanas, the 4 meditative absorptions that constitute the higher mind and provide a pleasant dwelling here and now. So this is the explicit aspect of samadhi, concentration. Then come 5 developments out of samadhi. These are the superpowers or super knowledges. That is, being able to wield the different kinds of supernormal power, to multiply the body, to vanish and appear, to travel through the air sitting cross-legged, to dive in and out of the earth, to walk on water, and so forth. Then comes the divine ear element. That's the ability to hear distant sounds and voices in other realms of existence. 7 is the ability to know the minds of other beings, of other people, to know exactly their state of mind. 8 is the recollection of past lives, to be able to recollect one's past lives. The divine eye, by which one could see beings passing away and taking rebirth. So these 5, from number 5, I think, up to number 9, are developments out of samadhi. So somebody who has mastered the jhanas, and beyond the jhanas, the formless meditations, and then makes the effort in this direction, can develop these superpowers or super knowledges.
These are all qualities of an arahant, right? These are, only an arahant would have any of these.
That's a good question, but let me just finish them, and then you raise the question. Okay, then the 10th one is, this is the we call the world transcending or supramundane realization. That is, by realizing for himself with direct knowledge, he here and now enters and abides in the deliverance of mind, deliverance by wisdom that are taintless with the destruction of the taints. That is, the destruction of all the defilements, which means, in effect, the attainment of arhatship. So then Ananda sums up and says, when a monk possesses these 10 qualities, then we honor, respect, revere, and venerate him. Now I should add a bit as a footnote, my suspicion or my personal belief or attitude is that for a monk to be respected, revered, and venerated, he shouldn't have to possess all of those qualities. It would seem that the superpowers maybe can be dispensed with, because there are many monks who the great majority didn't attain the superpowers. But certainly you take 1, 2, 3, 4, and the last one, 10, would be qualities that would make a monk superbly worthy of respect. And even it's said that to achieve arhatship, at least from the perspective of the developed tradition, maybe the jhanas are not absolutely necessary. And so even if a monk, through the practice of dry insight, achieves arhatship, certainly he would be worthy of respect and veneration. But it's possible that this statement was made here, this is just a conjecture, alluding to Mahakassapa, because Mahakassapa was praised by the Buddha for possessing, in fact, all of these qualities. That is, there are a number of suttas in the Samyutta Nikāya, chapter 16, that's the chapter about Mahakassapa, where the Buddha praises Mahakassapa's mastery of the jhanas, the formless meditations, and the superpowers. And then when the Sangha met at the boar's cave in order to undertake the council, to perform the recitation of the text, then Mahakassapa was the one who pretty much emerged as the president of the assembly, or the leader of the assembly. So he became, because he was the eldest surviving pupil of the Buddha. The chief disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana, they had passed away before the Buddha passed away. And Anuruddha was another elder, but I would assume that he was junior to Mahakassapa. And also Anuruddha was somewhat of a retiring type, a little bit sort of introspective, whereas Mahakassapa, he liked to dwell in solitude and remote places, but he had a strong, authoritative personality. Okay, let's just finish up the sutta because it's getting to the end of our time. Okay, I'm just going to jump down a little bit to save time. That as the conversation unfolds, then the Brahman Vasikara says to Ananda, this is just the end of section 25, he says, Master Gautama, that's the Buddha, was a meditator and cultivated meditation, and he praised every type of meditation. And so now you think, certainly the Buddha should praise every type of meditation, but Ananda criticizes the statement, and he says that the Buddha didn't praise every type of meditation, nor did he condemn every type of meditation. But there were certain types of meditation that the Buddha didn't praise. And what are these? Someone abides with his mind obsessed by sensual lust, then we'll just jump through them, by sensual lust, by ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and remorse and doubt, and then with his mind obsessed by doubt, he meditates, premeditates, outmeditates, and mismeditates. Here we have a string of verbs in Pali, somewhat difficult to translate exactly into English. There's a bit of a wordplay going on here. So the verbs are jayati, which is actually the verb for meditate, then pajayati, basically the same meaning, a little more forceful. Nijayati, this is what's translated here as out meditates, and upajayati, which suggests meditating off the right track. And so, in other words, Ananda is saying that if somebody's mind is overwhelmed by the 5 hindrances, and then he's meditating with his mind just driven by the 5 hindrances, then that's not the type of meditation that the Buddha praised. But then the type of meditation that the Buddha praised is, then comes the formula for the 4 jhanas. Okay, when Ananda says that, then the Brahman Vasikara accepts his statement then excuses himself and says, "We are busy, I have much to do," then he leaves. Then after he leaves, now at paragraph 29, okay. After Vasakara leaves, then the Brahmin Gopaka asks or says to the Venerable Ananda, he says, "Master, Ananda has not yet answered what we asked him." Then Ananda says, "Didn't we tell you?" And then he repeats the statement at the beginning of the sutta, that there's no single monk who has all of the qualities of the Buddha, for the Buddha was the one who aroused the unarisen path, and so on. And so there's a little question, why, when Ananda had answered, why did Gopaka Moggallana say that he hadn't yet answered? The sutta doesn't give an answer itself, but the commentary gives some explanation. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it's a little bit interesting about the observation on human behavior. According to the commentary, Gopaka Moggallana was somewhat envious that Vasakara sort of interrupted the conversation and got to ask many questions, and Ananda answered all of the questions, and he only got to ask one question. And so he felt a little or a lot, I don't know, but he felt somewhat upset by this. And so he thought, when I asked my question, Ananda answered me so briefly, and yet here this Vasakara comes, and Ananda answers so many questions and explains them at length. So he feels, I have to get a fuller explanation from Ananda. And so though Ananda had answered, he says, "You didn't answer my question. Please answer it now." And Ananda just repeats the answer. Okay, I'm sorry we didn't leave more time for questions. But we come back at the end, after the lunch. We'll break for the lunch now. And so then please come back, and then if you have any questions, you bear them in mind, and then we can discuss them after the lunch period. Yeah, we'll come back so that you don't have to rush through lunch and have a little chance to chat. Let's say 12:15. Okay? Okay, now we end with the sharing of the merits. So you have the sheets with the verses. So now we're going to recite in Pali. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavata cha mehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha mehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sappati siddhya. Yetavadacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabhe Satanumodhantu Sabha Sampati Siddhya Pavagupadaya Avichihitato Etantare Satakayupapana Rupya Rupicha Sanya Sanino Dukha Pamuchantu Pusantu Nibuting. Okay, we end with 3 half bows to the Buddha. Oh, I should mention that we have the class next week, and next week we'll take Sutta number 109. That's very interesting and very important sutta with many questions about the 5 aggregates. So this will give us a chance to go back and review the 5 aggregates and the nature of Sakkaya Ditthi, individuality view, whatever. That's my advertisement for next week's class.